The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training ground as Maria Santos adjusted the straps of her tactical vest. At 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighing barely 130 pounds, she looked almost childlike next to the towering male recruits who surrounded her. The other soldiers whispered among themselves, their voices carrying just loud enough for her to hear their doubts. "There's no way she'll make it through basic training," muttered Corporal Jenkins, a bulky man from Texas who had already made it clear he thought women didn't belong in combat roles. "My little sister could probably lift more than her." Maria had heard it all before. Growing up as the youngest of 5 children in a working-class family in East Los Angeles, she had always been underestimated. Her brothers were all over 6 feet tall, built like linebackers, while she had inherited her grandmother's petite frame. But what she lacked in size, she made up for in determination that burned like fire in her chest. The recruitment officer had tried to steer her toward administrative roles when she first walked into the Army Recruitment Center 6 months ago. "Have you considered working in communications?" he had asked, his eyes scanning her small frame with obvious skepticism. "Or perhaps medical support? Those are excellent career paths for someone with your build." But Maria hadn't spent 4 years working construction with her father's crew to be relegated to a desk job. She had hauled concrete blocks, operated heavy machinery, and worked 16-hour days under the scorching California sun. Her hands were calloused from years of hard labor, and her back was strong from lifting materials that grown men struggled with. She knew her capabilities, even if others couldn't see them. "I want infantry," she had told the recruiter firmly. "I want to serve on the front lines." The man had looked at her as if she had announced her intention to fly to the moon. After a long pause, he had shrugged and handed her the paperwork. "It's your funeral, kid. But don't say I didn't warn you." Now, standing in formation with 49 other recruits, Maria felt the weight of every doubt and every whispered conversation. Drill Sergeant Rodriguez paced in front of them like a prowling wolf, his steely gaze examining each soldier with the intensity of a man who had seen too much combat. "Today we begin strength and endurance training," Rodriguez announced, his voice carrying across the training ground like a thunderclap. "Some of you think you know what hard work means. You're about to learn how wrong you are." The first exercise was a gear carry. Each recruit would be required to transport a full battle load from point A to point B, a distance of 2 miles across varied terrain. The equipment included a rifle, ammunition, medical supplies, communications gear, and additional tactical equipment. The total weight exceeded 90 pounds. Maria watched as the male recruits stepped forward with confidence. Many of them had played football or worked physical jobs. They approached the equipment pile with the casual swagger of men who had never questioned their physical capabilities. One by one, they hefted the gear onto their backs and set off across the course. When her turn came, Maria approached the equipment with steady steps. The other recruits watched with barely concealed amusement, some placing bets on how far she would make it before collapsing. She ignored their stares and focused on the task ahead. The moment she lifted the pack, she felt the familiar burn in her shoulders and legs. It was heavy, heavier than anything she had carried during her construction work. But, as she adjusted the straps and found her balance, something clicked into place. This was just another job, another challenge to overcome. She started walking. The first half-mile was deceptively easy. The terrain was flat, and her body settled into a rhythm that she recognized from her years of manual labor. One foot in front of the other, breathing steady, mind focused on the destination rather than the weight on her back. Behind her, she could hear some of the male recruits already beginning to struggle. Heavy breathing, muttered curses, and the occasional grunt of effort reached her ears. But Maria maintained her pace, her steps sure and steady despite the growing burn in her muscles. The course turned uphill at the 1-mile mark, and this was where most recruits began to falter. Maria felt the additional strain immediately. Her legs began to ache, and sweat dripped down her face despite the cool morning air. But she had climbed hills carrying bags of cement mix. She had worked in heat that would have felled these same men who doubted her now. As she crested the hill, she realized with surprise that she was no longer following other recruits. She was leading them. Somehow, without even trying, her steady pace had carried her past several of the larger men who had started with such confidence. Santos! Drill Sergeant Rodriguez's voice boomed from somewhere behind her. What the hell do you think you're doing up there? Maria didn't break stride. Completing the exercise, Drill Sergeant. She couldn't see Rodriguez's face, but she could hear the surprise in his silence. No doubt he had expected her to be among the first to fall behind, possibly even to quit entirely. Instead, she was setting the pace for the entire group. The second mile included obstacles, a rope climb, a wall traverse, and a creek crossing with slippery rocks. This was where Maria's construction experience truly began to pay dividends. She had spent countless hours climbing scaffolding, navigating unstable surfaces, and maintaining her balance while carrying heavy loads. The rope climb that left several recruits struggling and cursing was second nature to her. She had been climbing ropes and cables since she was 14 years old, helping her father install cable systems on building sites. Her technique was efficient and smooth, while others exhausted themselves trying to muscle their way up through brute strength alone. At the wall traverse, her smaller size actually became an advantage. While larger recruits struggled to maintain their grip and support their body weight plus the equipment load, Maria moved across the wall with the agility of someone who had spent years navigating construction sites where one wrong step could mean serious injury or death. The creek crossing was where things became interesting. The rocks were slick from morning dew, and the weight of the equipment made balance treacherous. Maria watched as two recruits slipped and fell into the water, their gear soaked and their spirits deflated. She approached the crossing differently. Instead of trying to rush across like the others, she took her time, testing each rock before committing her full weight. Her father had taught her that in construction work, speed was less important than safety and precision. Measure twice, cut once, he used to say. And always think 3 steps ahead. Halfway across the creek, she heard a splash behind her. One of the larger recruits, a man named Patterson who had been particularly vocal about women in combat roles, had lost his footing and fallen into the water. He was struggling to get back on his feet, the weight of his soaked gear threatening to drag him down in the deeper water. Without hesitation, Maria turned back. She had already proven she could complete the course faster than most of the men who had doubted her. But leaving someone in trouble wasn't an option. Grab my hand, she called to Patterson, extending her arm while bracing herself on a stable rock. Patterson looked up at her with shock and embarrassment. Here was the woman he had been mocking, offering to help him when he was at his weakest moment. For a second, pride warred with desperation on his face. Come on, Maria insisted. Take my hand. Patterson reached up and grasped her wrist. Maria felt the full weight of him and his waterlogged gear threatening to pull her into the creek as well. Her muscles screamed in protest, already exhausted from the long carry. But she had helped her brothers out of more scrapes than she could count, and she wasn't about to fail now. Using techniques she had learned from years of moving heavy objects in tight spaces, Maria braced herself and began to pull. It wasn't about overpowering the weight, it was about leverage, positioning, and using her whole body efficiently. Slowly, steadily, she helped Patterson get his feet under him and guided him to stable ground. Thanks, Patterson mumbled, water dripping from his uniform and his face burning with shame. Move, Maria said simply. We both need to finish this. They completed the creek crossing together, Patterson following her lead as she picked out the safest path. By the time they reached the other side, they could hear Drill Sergeant Rodriguez shouting at other recruits who were still struggling with various obstacles. The final stretch was a straight run to the finish line, but it was uphill again, and Maria could feel her energy reserves running dangerously low. Her legs felt like rubber, and the pack seemed to be getting heavier with every step. This was the moment where mental toughness would make the difference. She thought about her grandmother, who had raised 5 children while working 2 jobs and never once complained about the burden. She thought about her father, who had taught her that work ethic was more important than natural talent. And she thought about all the people who had told her she wasn't strong enough, wasn't big enough, wasn't good enough. Each doubt became fuel for her determination. Each whispered comment about her size became another reason to keep putting one foot in front of the other. The pain in her legs became a reminder that she was doing something others couldn't do. As she approached the finish line, Maria realized that several other recruits were just now reaching the obstacle she had completed 20 minutes ago. She had not only finished the course but had done so faster than most of the men who had started with such confidence. Drill Sergeant Rodriguez was waiting at the finish line with a stopwatch and an expression that was unreadable. As Maria crossed the line, he checked his watch and shook his head slowly. "Santos," he said, his voice carrying a tone she hadn't heard from him before. "Do you know what you just did?" Maria set down her pack and tried to catch her breath. "Completed the exercise, Drill Sergeant." "You didn't just complete it," Rodriguez said, looking at his stopwatch again. "You just set a new course record for this training cycle. And you did it while helping another soldier who was in trouble." Around them, other recruits were still struggling to complete the course. Some had given up entirely and were walking the remaining distance without their equipment. Others were fighting through sheer stubborn determination but were clearly exhausted beyond their limits. Patterson appeared a few minutes later, his uniform still damp but his pack still on his back. He had finished the course thanks to Maria's help, though his time was far from impressive. As he set down his gear, he approached Maria with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly, glancing around to make sure the other recruits couldn't hear. "I was wrong about you. Dead wrong." Maria nodded but didn't say anything. She had learned long ago that proving yourself through actions was more effective than any argument. As the rest of the recruits gradually finished the course over the next hour, word spread about what Maria had accomplished. Some of the men who had been most vocal about her presence began to look at her differently. Others still seemed skeptical, as if her performance was somehow a fluke that wouldn't be repeated. But Drill Sergeant Rodriguez was no longer looking at her like she was a problem to be solved. There was something new in his expression, respect, perhaps, or at least recognition that he had seriously underestimated her capabilities. "Santos," he called as the training session concluded. "Report to my office after chow." Maria felt her stomach drop. In her experience, being called to the drill sergeant's office was never a good thing. Had she done something wrong? Was she in trouble for helping Patterson? Or was this the moment when they decided she was too much of a disruption to the unit? As she headed toward the mess hall with the other recruits, the whispers followed her. Some were impressed, others were suspicious, and a few were openly hostile. But, for the first time since arriving at basic training, Maria felt like she belonged. She had proven that she could carry the load, literally and figuratively. The real test, she knew, was just beginning. The mess hall buzzing with conversation as Maria sat down with her tray of food. The usual segregation between male and female recruits seemed more pronounced than ever, but now there was something different in the way people looked at her. Some stared with curiosity, others with skepticism, and a few with something that might have been respect. "Mind if I sit here?" Patterson asked, holding his tray awkwardly. Several other male recruits watched the interaction with interest. Maria gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Free country." Patterson sat down heavily, his still damp uniform squeaking against the plastic chair. For a moment, they ate in silence while conversations swirled around them. Finally, Patterson set down his fork and leaned forward. "I need to know something," he said quietly. "How did you do that? I mean, I've been lifting weights since I was 12. I played football in high school. I'm twice your size, and you left me in the dust." Maria continued eating, considering her response. She had learned early in life that revealing too much about yourself could be used against you later. But there was something genuine in Patterson's question, a real desire to understand rather than to find weaknesses. "My dad owns a construction company," she said finally. "I've been working construction since I was 14. You learn to work smart when you can't work big." "That's it?" Patterson looked skeptical. "Construction work?" "That's it." Maria met his gaze steadily. For years of carrying rebar, mixing concrete, operating machinery, working 12-hour days in 100-degree heat. You learn efficiency when every wasted motion costs you money. Across the mess hall, Corporal Jenkins was holding court at a table full of male recruits. His voice carried just enough for Maria to catch fragments of his conversation. "Beginner's luck, probably been training for months, won't last when the real tests start." Maria ignored the comments and finished her meal. She had heard similar things when she first started working construction. The men on her father's crew had been skeptical until she proved herself day after day, job after job. Eventually, they had stopped treating her like a novelty and started treating her like a worker. Some had even come to prefer working with her because she was reliable and didn't waste time with ego games. After lunch, Maria reported to Drill Sergeant Rodriguez's office as ordered. She knocked on the doorframe and stood at attention. "Santos, come in and close the door." Rodriguez's office was sparse and functional, like the man himself. A metal desk, 2 chairs, filing cabinets, and walls covered with military regulations, training schedules, and photographs from various deployments. Rodriguez himself was seated behind the desk, studying a file that Maria assumed contained her records. "Sit down," he said without looking up. "Tell me about your background." For the next 20 minutes, Maria answered questions about her family, her work experience, her education, and her reasons for enlisting. Rodriguez listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes in her file. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and studied her with the same intensity he had shown on the training ground. "Your performance today was impressive," he said finally. "But it also creates problems." Maria felt her heart sink. "Problems, Drill Sergeant?" "The men in this unit have certain expectations about women in combat roles. Some of them are here because they believe this is still a man's world, and they don't appreciate evidence to the contrary. Your success today challenged some deeply held beliefs." Rodriguez stood and walked to the window, looking out at the training ground where the afternoon session was about to begin. "I've been training soldiers for 15 years, he continued. "I've seen strong men break under pressure and small men accomplish impossible things. I've learned that predicting who will succeed and who will fail is more art than science. But I've also learned that sometimes the most capable soldiers create the most disruption in a unit." "Are you asking me to hold back, Drill Sergeant?" Rodriguez turned back to face her, and, for the first time since she had met him, she saw what might have been a smile cross his face. "Hell no. I'm asking you to be ready for what comes next. Because after today, every exercise is going to feel like a personal challenge from the men who think you made them look bad. They're going to push harder, train longer, and look for any opportunity to prove that today was a fluke." He returned to his desk and opened another file. "I'm also informing you that you've been selected for advanced training opportunities. Your performance today, combined with your background, suggests you might be suitable for specialized roles that require both physical capability and problem-solving skills." Maria tried to hide her excitement. Advanced training meant better assignments, more responsibility, and, eventually, better pay. It also meant more challenges and higher expectations. "Thank you, Drill Sergeant. I won't let you down." "You haven't let me down yet. But we're just getting started. Report to the training ground in 10 minutes. Today's afternoon session is combat load carries over extended distances. Think you can handle 5 miles with full battle gear?" Maria stood and saluted. "Yes, Drill Sergeant." As she left Rodriguez's office, Maria felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. The advanced training opportunity was exactly what she had hoped for, but Rodriguez's warning about the other recruits was troubling. She had dealt with hostile co-workers before, but military training was different. Here, the people who resented her success were also the people she would have to trust with her life in combat situations. The afternoon training session confirmed Rodriguez's prediction. The male recruits approached the 5-mile combat load carry with grim determination, as if their masculinity depended on outperforming the small woman who had embarrassed them that morning. The equipment load was even heavier this time: rifle, ammunition, medical supplies, communications gear, food, water, and additional tactical equipment totaling over 100 pounds. The route included hills, obstacles, and terrain designed to simulate combat conditions. Maria approached the challenge with the same methodical preparation she had used that morning. She adjusted her gear for optimal weight distribution, checked all her straps and buckles, and mentally mapped the most efficient route through the obstacles she could see ahead. But, this time, she wasn't the only one prepared. Patterson had clearly spent his lunch break thinking about technique rather than just strength. Several other recruits had also made adjustments to their approach, learning from the morning's lessons. The first mile was a tactical lesson in competitive psychology. Multiple recruits tried to set a pace that would force Maria to overextend herself early in the exercise. They pushed harder than was sustainable, hoping to create a gap that would prove their superiority. Maria ignored the games and maintained her own pace. She had learned from her father that construction work was about endurance, not sprint speed. The job that takes all day still needs to be finished at the end of the day, he used to tell her. Don't burn yourself out in the first hour. By the second mile, the psychological warfare was taking its toll on the men who had initiated it. Several recruits who had started fast were now struggling to maintain their pace. Their breathing was labored, their steps were becoming unsteady, and their form was deteriorating rapidly. Maria continued at her steady pace, gradually moving past the recruits who had overextended themselves. But she also noticed that Patterson and 2 other recruits had learned from the morning's lesson and were maintaining sustainable paces that kept them competitive. The third mile included the most challenging obstacles: a rope bridge over a simulated ravine, a series of walls requiring climbing techniques, and a crawl through mud under low-hanging barriers. This was where technique and experience would matter more than raw strength. At the rope bridge, Maria used climbing techniques her father had taught her for working on bridges and high-rise construction. Instead of trying to power across through arm strength alone, she used her legs and core to maintain stability while moving efficiently from section to section. Behind her, she could hear other recruits struggling with the crossing. The bridge swayed and bounced with each person's movement, making balance treacherous when combined with the heavy equipment load. She heard at least one recruit fall into the safety net below, his equipment scattered and his time ruined. The wall obstacles required upper body strength, but they also required problem-solving skills. Each wall was a different height and had different handholds available. Maria approached each one like a construction puzzle, analyzing the most efficient path before committing to the climb. She watched with interest as Patterson successfully navigated the walls using techniques that were clearly influenced by her performance that morning. He was learning to work smart instead of just working hard, and his times were improving as a result. The mud crawl was where Maria's small size became a significant advantage. The barriers were low enough that larger recruits had to struggle to squeeze through while carrying their equipment. Maria was able to move through the obstacles with relative ease, maintaining better speed than soldiers twice her size. But the crawl was also where she encountered her first real hostility from another recruit. Corporal Jenkins had been waiting for an opportunity to make his point, and he found it in the confines of the mud crawl where Drill Sergeant Rodriguez couldn't easily observe their interactions. As Maria approached one of the narrower passages, Jenkins positioned himself to block her path. "Ladies first," he said with mock courtesy, but his body language made it clear he had no intention of moving aside. "Move," Maria said simply. She was tired, dirty, and focused on completing the exercise efficiently. "I don't think so," Jenkins replied. "Maybe it's time someone taught you about respect for your betters." Maria studied Jenkins for a moment. He was larger and stronger than her, and, in the confines of the muddy tunnel, size would be an advantage. But she had dealt with bullies before, both on construction sites and in her neighborhood growing up. "Last chance," she said quietly. "Move aside or I go through you." Jenkins laughed. "I'd like to see you try, little girl." What happened next would become part of basic training legend at Fort Benning. Maria didn't try to overpower Jenkins or engage in a wrestling match that would favor his size advantage. Instead, she used a technique her oldest brother had taught her for dealing with larger opponents. She feinted left as if trying to squeeze past him, then quickly shifted right and used his own momentum against him as he moved to block her. A quick push in exactly the right place at exactly the right moment sent Jenkins sliding sideways into the mud while Maria slipped past him through the opening he had been guarding. "Thanks for the help," she called back as she continued through the obstacle course. By the time Jenkins had regained his footing and his composure, Maria was already 2 obstacles ahead and impossible to catch. His attempt to intimidate her had not only failed but had cost him valuable time and left him covered in even more mud than the exercise required. Word of the incident spread quickly among the recruits, carried by soldiers who had witnessed Jenkins's humiliation from nearby obstacles. The story grew in the telling, but the essential facts remained the same. The smallest recruit in the unit had outmaneuvered one of the largest and most vocal critics without breaking her pace or losing her focus. The final 2 miles of the exercise were a test of pure endurance. The obstacles were behind them, but the equipment felt heavier with each step, and the accumulated fatigue was taking its toll on everyone. This was where mental toughness would separate the successful recruits from those who would struggle throughout their military careers. Maria fell into a mental rhythm that she had developed during long days of construction work. She focused on her breathing, maintained efficient form, and broke the remaining distance into smaller, manageable segments. Each hilltop became a milestone, each landmark became a small victory. Around her, she could hear other recruits struggling. Some were muttering complaints, others were breathing heavily, and a few were beginning to fall significantly behind. But she also noticed that Patterson and several others were maintaining good form and competitive times. As she approached the final mile, Maria realized that she was once again in the lead, but this time by a much smaller margin. The morning's exercise had been a lesson for everyone involved, and several recruits had clearly taken that lesson to heart. The finish line came into view as Maria crested the final hill. Drill Sergeant Rodriguez was waiting with his stopwatch, along with several other training instructors who had apparently come to observe the afternoon session. Word about the morning's record-setting performance had obviously spread beyond the immediate training unit. Maria crossed the finish line and immediately set down her equipment, her legs shaking from exhaustion. The exercise had been significantly more challenging than the morning session, and she had been forced to dig deeper into her reserves of strength and determination. Rodriguez checked his stopwatch and made a note on his clipboard before looking up at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Santos," he said loud enough for the gathering crowd of instructors to hear. "You just broke another record. And, this time, you did it while dealing with deliberate interference from another recruit." Behind her, Maria could hear other recruits finishing the course. Patterson arrived less than 2 minutes behind her, followed by several others who had clearly learned from the morning's lessons about pacing and technique. When Jenkins finally crossed the finish line nearly 15 minutes later, he was exhausted, demoralized, and covered in mud from his encounter with Maria in the obstacle course. His attempt to prove his superiority had backfired spectacularly, leaving him as one of the slowest finishers in the group. As the training session concluded, Maria found herself surrounded by instructors asking questions about her background and training techniques. It was clear that her performance was generating interest at levels well above the basic training unit. But, more importantly, she noticed that the other recruits were looking at her differently now. The skepticism was still there, but it was mixed with something else, recognition that she belonged here, that she had earned her place through performance rather than politics or special treatment. Patterson approached as the crowd of instructors dispersed. "That thing with Jenkins," he said quietly. "How did you know he would react that way?" Maria shouldered her rifle and started walking toward the equipment storage area. "People like Jenkins always react the same way when they can't win through normal competition. They try to change the rules or create situations where they have an advantage." "And you were ready for it?" "I've been dealing with people like Jenkins my whole life," Maria replied. "The key is not to let them choose the terms of engagement. You stay focused on your objectives and let them waste their energy on games." As they walked, other recruits joined the conversation, asking questions about techniques, training methods, and mental preparation. For the first time since arriving at basic training, Maria felt like she was part of a team rather than an outsider trying to prove herself. But, even as she answered their questions and shared her knowledge, she knew that bigger challenges were ahead. Advanced training would bring new tests, new skeptics, and new opportunities to succeed or fail. The records she had set today were just the beginning of a longer journey that would determine not only her own military career but also the opportunities available to women who would follow in her footsteps. That evening, as she cleaned her equipment and prepared for the next day's training, Maria allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. She had proven that strength wasn't just about size or muscle mass. She had shown that determination, intelligence, and proper technique could overcome physical disadvantages. But, more importantly, she had begun to change minds about what women could accomplish in roles traditionally reserved for men. The whispers of doubt were being replaced by conversations about capability, and that change was worth every ounce of effort she had expended. 3 weeks later, Maria stood in formation with 24 other recruits who had been selected for the Advanced Infantry Training Program. The basic training cycle had ended with her graduating as the top performer in physical fitness, marksmanship, and overall military bearing. But she knew that advanced training would present entirely different challenges. The Advanced Infantry Training Facility was located on a separate part of the base, with specialized equipment and training areas designed to simulate real combat conditions. The barracks were smaller, housing only the selected recruits, and the atmosphere was noticeably more serious than basic training. Staff Sergeant Williams, their new primary instructor, was a combat veteran with 3 tours in Afghanistan and a reputation for training some of the most elite soldiers in the army. He stood before the assembled group with the bearing of a man who had seen real war and had no patience for anything less than excellence. "You're here because someone thinks you have potential," Williams began, his voice carrying the authority of experience. "But potential means nothing if you can't execute under pressure. Advanced infantry training isn't about proving you're tough. It's about proving you can think, adapt, and lead when everything goes wrong." Maria listened intently as Williams outlined the program. They would be training with heavier equipment, more complex scenarios, and realistic combat simulations. The physical demands would be greater, but, more importantly, they would be expected to make tactical decisions under stress and lead other soldiers in challenging situations. "Your first exercise begins in 1 hour," Williams continued. "You'll be divided into 4 teams of 6 soldiers each. Each team will be assigned a mission objective and given a limited amount of equipment and ammunition. The scenario is a combat patrol in hostile territory where you must accomplish your objective while dealing with enemy contact and equipment failures." As the formation dispersed, Maria found herself grouped with Patterson, 2 other recruits from her original basic training unit, and 2 soldiers she hadn't met before. One of them, Sergeant First Class Martinez, was already an experienced soldier who had been selected for additional leadership training. "Okay, team," Martinez said as they gathered around a map table. "Our objective is to secure and hold a communication relay station approximately 3 miles from our starting position. Intelligence reports indicate possible enemy presence in the area, and we need to be prepared for contact." Maria studied the map carefully, noting elevation changes, potential cover positions, and likely approach routes. Her construction experience had taught her to read terrain and understand how geography would affect movement and operations. "What's our equipment loadout?" she asked. Martinez consulted his briefing sheet. "Standard infantry weapons and ammunition, radio communication gear, medical supplies, and explosive charges for destroying enemy equipment if necessary. Total weight per person is approximately 80 pounds, but we also have team equipment that needs to be distributed." Over the next 30 minutes, they planned their approach to the objective. Martinez had tactical knowledge from his previous military experience, but he also encouraged input from the other team members. Maria found herself contributing ideas about route selection and movement techniques based on her understanding of terrain and logistics. When the exercise began, their team moved out across country terrain that was deliberately challenging. The route to the communication relay station included dense forest, steep hills, and open areas where they would be vulnerable to observation and enemy fire. The first challenge came just 20 minutes into the patrol. The radio operator, a recruit named Davis, announced that his communication equipment was malfunctioning. In a real combat situation, this would mean they could no longer coordinate with headquarters or call for support if they encountered enemy forces. "Options?" Martinez asked, testing the team's problem-solving abilities under pressure. "We continue with the mission," Davis suggested. "Maybe we can get the radio working once we reach the objective." "We should send someone back to base to report the equipment failure," another team member countered. Maria was examining the radio equipment while the discussion continued. Her experience with construction tools and electrical systems gave her a different perspective on the problem. "The antenna connection is loose," she announced. "Give me 2 minutes." Using techniques she had learned from years of troubleshooting construction equipment, Maria quickly identified and fixed the connection problem. The radio crackled to life, restoring their communication capability. "Good work, Santos," Martinez said with obvious approval. "That kind of problem-solving ability is exactly what we need in the field." The patrol continued through increasingly difficult terrain. Maria noticed that the heavy equipment load was affecting some team members more than others, but this time everyone was maintaining reasonable performance standards. The lessons from basic training had clearly been internalized by the entire group. 2 hours into the exercise, they encountered their first enemy contact, training instructors wearing opposing force uniforms and carrying simulation weapons that fired laser beams instead of bullets. Each soldier wore sensors that would register hits and determine casualties. The engagement began suddenly, with simulated gunfire coming from concealed positions ahead of their planned route. Martinez immediately took charge, directing the team to take cover and return fire while assessing the tactical situation. "Santos, Patterson, move left and try to flank their position," Martinez ordered. "Davis, maintain radio contact with base and report our situation. The rest of you, provide covering fire." Maria and Patterson moved through the forest with practiced efficiency, using terrain features and natural cover to approach the enemy position from an unexpected direction. Maria's small size allowed her to move through dense undergrowth without being easily detected, while Patterson provided covering fire when needed. As they approached the flanking position, Maria spotted something that concerned her. The opposing force had positioned their weapons to cover the obvious approach routes, but they had left a gap in their defensive line that could be exploited with proper coordination. Using hand signals she had learned in basic training, Maria communicated her observations to Patterson. Together, they developed a plan to exploit the weakness in the enemy position while the rest of their team maintained pressure from the front. The flanking maneuver was executed perfectly. Maria and Patterson were able to get behind the opposing force position and engage them with simulated fire from an unexpected direction. The exercise controllers declared the enemy position neutralized and the team free to continue toward their objective. "Outstanding work," Martinez said as they regrouped. "That was exactly the kind of tactical thinking and execution we need to see." But the exercise was far from over. As they approached the communication relay station, they discovered that it was defended by a larger opposing force with better equipment and prepared positions. This was where the real test would begin. The relay station was positioned on high ground with clear fields of fire in all directions. The defenders had established multiple firing positions and had obviously been given time to prepare their defenses. A direct assault would be costly and might not succeed. Martinez called for a team meeting to discuss their options. "We have 3 choices," he explained. "Direct assault, which will probably result in heavy casualties. Wait for darkness and try a night attack. Or try to find an alternative approach that avoids the main defenses." Maria studied the terrain around the relay station through her binoculars. The position was well chosen and professionally defended, but her construction experience was giving her ideas that pure military training might not suggest. "There's a utility access road on the backside of the hill," she observed. "It looks like it was built for maintenance vehicles to reach the communication equipment. The defenders might not be covering it as heavily because it's not a natural infantry approach route." Patterson nodded in agreement. "And the terrain on that side is steep enough that they might not expect an attack from that direction." Martinez considered their suggestion carefully. Using the utility road would require a longer approach march and would be physically demanding because of the steep terrain. But it might allow them to reach the objective without the heavy casualties that a frontal assault would cause. "It's worth trying," Martinez decided. "But we need to move fast. If they spot us during the approach, we'll be caught in the open with no cover." The movement to the alternative approach route took 40 minutes of careful navigation through difficult terrain. Maria's experience reading topographic maps and understanding elevation changes proved valuable in selecting the best path through the hills and forests. When they reached the utility access road, they discovered that Maria's assessment had been correct. The road provided a concealed approach to within 200 meters of the communication relay station, and the defenders had apparently not positioned anyone to cover this route. But they also discovered a new problem. The final approach to the station required crossing an open area with no cover, and there was a chain-link fence topped with razor wires surrounding the facility. Getting through the fence quietly would require tools they didn't have, and any noise would alert the defenders to their presence. "We need a diversion," Martinez said after studying the situation. "Something to draw their attention away from this side of the perimeter while we cut through the fence and get inside." This was where Maria's construction background provided another unexpected solution. "I can get us through that fence without making noise," she said confidently. "But we'll need something to muffle the sound of cutting through the wire." Using their medical supplies and equipment padding, they were able to create sound dampeners that would reduce the noise of cutting through the fence. Maria's experience with wire cutters and fence construction allowed her to identify the most efficient points to cut, minimizing both time and noise. While she worked on the fence, Patterson and Davis moved to positions where they could create a diversion if needed. Martinez maintained radio contact with their base unit and coordinated timing for the final assault phase. The fence cutting took 12 minutes of careful work, but Maria was able to create an opening large enough for the entire team to pass through without triggering any alarms or alerting the defenders. They were now inside the perimeter of the communication relay station with the element of surprise intact. The final phase of the exercise required them to capture the relay station, secure the communications equipment, and hold the position against a counterattack from the opposing force. This was where all of their training in teamwork, tactics, and individual skills would be tested simultaneously. Maria and Patterson approached the main communications building from one direction while Martinez and the others approached from another angle. The plan was to overwhelm the defenders quickly before they could organize an effective resistance. The assault was executed with precision that surprised even Maria. Each team member performed their assigned role flawlessly, and the coordination between the different elements was seamless. The defenders were caught completely off guard and were overwhelmed before they could mount an effective response. Within minutes, the team had secured the communications equipment and established defensive positions to hold against the expected counterattack. Maria found herself responsible for operating some of the captured communication gear, using skills she had developed from years of working with complex electronic equipment in construction work. The counterattack came 20 minutes later, with the opposing force attempting to retake the relay station using superior numbers and heavy weapons. But the defending team's position was strong, their coordination was excellent, and their individual skills had been proven throughout the exercise. Maria distinguished herself during the defense by using the communication equipment to coordinate with friendly forces and call in simulated artillery support against the attacking force. Her ability to quickly learn new systems and operate under pressure was exactly what the advanced training program was designed to identify and develop. When the exercise concluded 2 hours later, the team had successfully completed their mission and held their position against multiple counterattacks. Staff Sergeant Williams and the other exercise controllers gathered the teams for a detailed debrief of their performance. Team 3, Williams announced, referring to Maria's team, demonstrated exceptional tactical thinking, problem-solving ability, and teamwork throughout this exercise. Your use of alternative approach routes, creative solutions to technical problems, and effective coordination during the assault and defense phases exceeded expectations. He looked directly at Maria as he continued. Santos, your contributions to this team's success were significant and varied. Technical problem-solving, terrain analysis, tactical innovation, and communication system operation. You've demonstrated the kind of versatility that we look for in advanced infantry soldiers. After the debrief, Martinez approached Maria privately. That was some of the best teamwork I've seen from a new soldier, he said. You've got good instincts for this kind of work. Have you given any thought to what specialty you want to pursue? Maria had been thinking about exactly that question since the exercise began. The advanced training was opening up possibilities she hadn't previously considered, and her performance was apparently creating opportunities for specialized roles. "I'm interested in combat engineering," she replied. "Combining construction skills with tactical operations seems like a natural fit." Martinez nodded approvingly. "Combat engineers are always in demand, and your background would be a huge advantage. You should talk to Williams about the combat engineer training track." That evening, as Maria cleaned her equipment and reviewed the day's lessons, she reflected on how much had changed since that first day of basic training when everyone had doubted her capabilities. The whispers about her size and strength had been replaced by discussions of her skills and potential. But she also knew that each success brought new challenges and higher expectations. Combat engineer training would be even more demanding than advanced infantry training, with technical requirements that would test both her physical capabilities and her mental acuity. The path ahead was uncertain, but, for the first time in her military career, Maria felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The gear that others couldn't touch was becoming the foundation for a military career that would challenge every assumption about what women could accomplish in combat roles. As she prepared for the next day's training, Maria smiled to herself. Her father had always told her that the best jobs were the ones where you got paid to solve interesting problems. Tomorrow would bring new problems to solve, and she was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. 6 months later, Specialist Maria Santos stood at the edge of a combat engineering training ground, wearing the distinctive crossed rifles and castle insignia that marked her as a qualified combat engineer. The journey from that first doubtful day in basic training had been challenging, but each obstacle had only strengthened her resolve and enhanced her capabilities. The combat engineer training had been everything Martinez had promised and more. She had learned to operate heavy construction equipment under combat conditions, handle explosives safely and effectively, build and destroy fortifications, and solve complex logistical problems in hostile environments. Her construction background had proven invaluable, but the military applications had expanded her skills far beyond anything she had imagined. Now she faced her final examination, a comprehensive field exercise that would test every aspect of her training over a 3-day period. The scenario was a forward operating base construction project in simulated enemy territory, where her team would be required to build defensive positions, clear obstacles, and maintain operations while under intermittent attack. Santos called Captain Mitchell, the combat engineer training commander. "You'll be leading Team Alpha on this exercise. Your mission is to establish a vehicle checkpoint, construct defensive barriers, and maintain supply route security over a 72-hour period." Maria accepted the mission briefing with the confidence that had grown through months of successful training. Leading a team was a new responsibility, but one that felt natural after her experiences in advanced infantry training. Her team consisted of 5 other combat engineer students, including Patterson, who had followed a similar training path after their successful partnership in earlier exercises. "What's our equipment allocation, ma'am?" Maria asked, reviewing the mission parameters. "Full engineer equipment set," Captain Mitchell replied. "Bulldozer, excavator, welding equipment, concrete barriers, communications gear, and enough supplies to sustain operations for the duration of the exercise. You'll also have simulated explosive ordnance for clearing obstacles and defensive charges for destroying equipment if you're overrun." The equipment list was impressive and daunting. Maria had operated all of the machinery during training, but coordinating the use of multiple heavy systems while maintaining security and completing construction objectives would require careful planning and flawless execution. Over the next 4 hours, Maria and her team developed their operational plan. The checkpoint location had been selected for its strategic importance, but it presented several engineering challenges. The terrain was uneven, drainage was poor, and the existing road surface was inadequate for heavy military traffic. "Our first priority is establishing security," Maria explained to her team as they studied aerial photographs of the area. "We can't build anything if we're constantly under attack. Patterson, I want you to survey defensive firing positions while I assess the construction requirements." "What about the drainage problem?" asked Specialist Torres, their team's expert on earth-moving operations. "If we don't address that first, everything we build could be compromised by the first heavy rain." Maria nodded appreciatively. Torres had identified a critical issue that could undermine the entire project.
Good point. We'll need to install drainage culverts before we start building the checkpoint structure. Can you calculate how many we'll need and where they should be positioned?
As the planning session continued, Maria found herself drawing on every aspect of her training and experience. The engineering challenges required her construction background, the security concerns demanded her infantry skills, and the leadership responsibilities tested her ability to coordinate multiple specialists working toward a common objective.
When the exercise began the following morning, Maria's team moved to their assigned area with the efficiency of experienced professionals.
The months of training had transformed them from individual soldiers into a cohesive unit capable of tackling complex problems together.
The first challenge came within hours of their arrival. The access road to the checkpoint location was blocked by a simulated landslide that required immediate attention.
In a real combat situation, clearing the obstacle quickly would be essential for maintaining supply lines and troop movements.
Torres, get the bulldozer operational and start moving the larger rocks, Maria ordered.
Patterson, check for simulated explosives in the debris pile. Everyone else, start hand clearing the smaller materials. The obstacle clearing operation took 3 hours of coordinated effort, but it also provided valuable lessons about teamwork and problem solving under pressure. Maria discovered that her team worked most effectively when she provided clear objectives and, then, allowed each specialist to determine the best methods for achieving those goals. With the access road cleared, they could begin the main construction phase of the exercise. The checkpoint design required concrete barriers, protective overhead cover, communication facilities, and vehicle inspection areas that would allow traffic to flow efficiently while maintaining security. Maria approached the construction project with the systematic thinking she had learned from her father's construction business. Each element had to be built in the proper sequence, with adequate time for concrete to cure and systems to be tested before they would be relied upon operationally.
Foundation work first, she announced as the team assembled their equipment.
We can't build anything solid without proper foundations, and we can't pour foundations until we've solved the drainage problems. The drainage system installation required precise coordination between the excavator operator and the workers installing culvert pipes. Maria found herself moving constantly between different work areas, ensuring that each element of the project was progressing according to schedule while maintaining the security posture that would protect the team from simulated enemy attacks. The first enemy contact came on the afternoon of the first day, just as they were preparing to pour concrete for the checkpoint foundations. The attack was sudden and intensive, with multiple simulated enemy soldiers attempting to disrupt their operations and destroy their equipment.
Contact front,
Patterson shouted from his security position.
Multiple targets approaching from the tree line. Maria had to make split-second decisions about priorities.
They could abandon the concrete pour to focus entirely on repelling the attack, but that would mean starting the construction process over from the beginning. Alternatively, they could try to continue working while maintaining defensive fire, risking both the concrete work and the security of the team. Torres, shut down the mixer and take cover, she ordered.
Everyone else, defensive positions.
We finish the attack, then we finish the concrete. The firefight lasted 20 minutes and required every member of the team to demonstrate both their combat skills and their ability to think tactically under pressure. Maria coordinated the defense while also ensuring that critical equipment was protected from simulated enemy fire. When the attack was repelled, they discovered that their quick thinking had saved both the concrete work and the construction equipment. The foundations could be completed on schedule, and the project could continue without major delays. Good work, everyone, Maria said as they resumed construction activities. But stay alert. They'll be back, probably when we're least prepared for them.
Her prediction proved accurate.
The second attack came during the night shift, when visibility was limited and fatigue was affecting everyone's performance. This time, the simulated enemy forces used different tactics, attempting to infiltrate the construction site rather than conducting a direct assault. Maria was awakened by Patterson's whispered radio call, "Team leader, we have movement in the perimeter. Possible infiltration attempt in progress."
The night engagement required different skills than the daylight firefight.
Maria had to coordinate her team's response while maintaining noise discipline and preserving their night vision capabilities. The construction site, with its heavy equipment and building materials, created a complex environment for tactical operations. Using night vision equipment and careful movement techniques, Maria's team was able to detect and engage the infiltrating enemy forces without compromising their defensive positions. The engagement demonstrated their tactical proficiency and their ability to adapt to changing circumstances. But the night attack also revealed vulnerabilities in their security plan. The construction activity had created blind spots and covered approaches that enemy forces could exploit. Maria realized they would need to modify their defensive positions and adjust their construction schedule to address these security concerns. "We need to install additional lighting and adjust our barrier placement," she explained to her team during the post-action review. "The construction site is changing the tactical environment, and we need to adapt our security measures accordingly." The second day of the exercise focused on completing the checkpoint infrastructure while maintaining security against increasingly sophisticated enemy attacks. Maria discovered that leading a construction project under combat conditions required constant balancing between engineering requirements and tactical necessities. The checkpoint design had to be modified several times to address security vulnerabilities that became apparent during enemy attacks. Each modification required re-engineering parts of the structure and adjusting the construction timeline to accommodate new requirements. "This is exactly what happens in real combat engineering," Captain Mitchell observed during one of his periodic visits to evaluate their progress. "The enemy doesn't wait for you to finish building before they attack, and you can't build effective fortifications without understanding how they'll be used tactically." Maria's team rose to meet each new challenge with creativity and determination. Torres developed innovative solutions for installing barriers while under fire. Patterson created overlapping fields of fire that protected both the workers and the construction equipment. Other team members contributed specialized skills that enhanced both the engineering and security aspects of their mission. The final day of the exercise brought the most challenging test yet, a sustained enemy assault designed to overwhelm the checkpoint's defenses and force the engineers to destroy their own work to prevent it from falling into enemy hands. The attack began before dawn and continued in waves throughout the morning. Maria had to coordinate defensive operations while also preparing demolition charges that would destroy the checkpoint if they were forced to retreat. The decision of when to withdraw and when to continue fighting would test her judgment and leadership abilities under extreme pressure. "Santos," Captain Mitchell's voice crackled over the radio during the height of the battle. "You have authorization to initiate demolition procedures if your position becomes untenable. But, remember, destroying your own work should be the last resort." Maria assessed the tactical situation carefully. Her team was holding their positions effectively, their ammunition supplies were adequate, and the checkpoint fortifications were proving effective against enemy attacks. But she also knew that the exercise controllers could escalate the scenario at any time, simulating reinforcements or heavy weapons that would overwhelm their defenses. "Continue defensive operations," she ordered. "But prepare demolition charges for immediate activation. I want to be ready to execute if the situation changes." The preparation of demolition charges while under fire required precise coordination and nerves of steel. Each explosive device had to be positioned to maximize destruction of critical infrastructure while ensuring that the demolition team could escape safely before detonation. As the morning progressed, Maria's team demonstrated resilience and tactical skill that impressed even the experienced evaluators. They maintained their positions against multiple attacks, protected their equipment and supplies, and continued to operate the checkpoint facilities even under combat conditions. The final enemy assault came at midday, with simulated heavy weapons and overwhelming numbers that would have been impossible to resist in a real combat situation. This was the moment when Maria had to decide whether to continue fighting or to initiate the demolition sequence that would destroy everything they had built. "All stations, this is Team Alpha Leader," Maria announced over the radio. "Initiate demolition sequence. 30 seconds to detonation." The decision to destroy their own work was emotionally difficult, but tactically correct. In real combat, preventing military infrastructure from falling into enemy hands was often more important than preserving the structures themselves. The simulated demolition marked the end of the exercise, and the evaluators called a halt to all operations. Maria's team had successfully completed every aspect of their mission. They had built functional military infrastructure under combat conditions, maintained security throughout the construction process, and made appropriate tactical decisions when faced with overwhelming enemy pressure. Outstanding performance, Specialist Santos, Captain Mitchell said as the evaluation team assembled for the final debrief. Your leadership, technical skills, and tactical judgment throughout this exercise have been exemplary. You've demonstrated exactly the kind of capabilities we need in combat engineering leadership positions. As Maria stood with her team, exhausted but proud, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The doubts about her size and strength seemed like ancient history now. She had proven herself not just as a soldier who could carry heavy equipment, but as a leader who could solve complex problems and make critical decisions under the most challenging circumstances. Patterson approached as the debrief concluded. Remember that first day in basic training? He asked with a grin. When everyone thought you wouldn't last a week? Maria smiled, remembering the whispered comments and skeptical looks that had followed her through those early days. I remember. But I also remember that you were one of the first to realize there was more to strength than just muscle mass. What's next for you? Patterson asked. Word is you're being considered for some specialized assignments. Maria looked out across the training ground where other teams were still conducting their exercises, facing the same challenges and opportunities she had encountered. I think I'd like to stay in training roles for a while, she said. Help other soldiers discover that there are different ways to be strong. As she walked toward the equipment storage areas to begin the post-exercise cleanup, Maria thought about all the young women who might follow similar paths in the future. The barriers weren't completely broken, but they had been weakened significantly. Each success made the next one a little easier, each accomplishment opened new possibilities. The gear that no ordinary soldier could touch had become the foundation for an extraordinary military career. But, more importantly, it had become proof that strength comes in many forms, and that the most challenging obstacles can be overcome by those who refuse to accept limitations imposed by others. 6 months ago, Maria Santos had been just another recruit trying to prove she belonged. Today, she was a combat engineer qualified to lead others through the same challenges and opportunities she had mastered. Tomorrow, she would help write the next chapter in the story of what women could accomplish when given the chance to prove their worth through performance rather than presumption. The strength that others couldn't see had become the foundation for achievements that no one could deny.